When my boss Marcus told me to grab the toilet brush and get on my knees in front of the entire executive team, I smiled politely and did exactly what he asked. What he didn't know was that I owned the mortgage on his $1 million house, and his next payment was due in 72 hours. The look on his face when I foreclosed on his dream home during the quarterly board meeting was worth every humiliating moment he put me through. But this story doesn't start with toilet brushes or mortgage papers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The real story began 18 months earlier, on what should have been the proudest day of my career. My name is Rachel Martinez, and at 29, I had just been promoted to Senior Financial Analyst at Meridian Capital, one of the most prestigious investment firms in downtown Seattle. I'd worked my way up from a junior position over 5 grueling years, putting in 80-hour weeks, sacrificing weekends, and proving myself in a male-dominated industry that seemed determined to keep women like me in supporting roles. The promotion came with a corner office, a 30% salary increase, and what I thought was finally the respect I'd earned through countless late nights and successful portfolio management. I'd graduated summa cum laude from University of Washington with degrees in both finance and real estate law, a combination that had served me well in understanding the complex intersection of investment strategies and property markets. My colleagues knew me as the person who could spot a bad deal from a mile away and structure financing that maximized returns while minimizing risk. What they didn't know was that my expertise extended far beyond the corporate portfolios I managed. I'd been quietly building my own real estate investment company on the side, using my industry knowledge and contacts to identify undervalued properties and distressed mortgages. It started small, with a duplex I bought and renovated using my signing bonus from Meridian. Then a small apartment building whose previous owner had defaulted. Within 3 years, I owned 17 properties across the greater Seattle area and held private mortgages on 12 more. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was helping wealthy clients multiply their millions at Meridian, I was building my own modest empire one property at a time. The real estate business taught me patience, strategic thinking, and most importantly, the power of information. I learned to research every property owner, every mortgage holder, every zoning change and development plan that might affect property values. Knowledge, I discovered, was the ultimate currency. Marcus Richardson had been my supervisor since I started at Meridian, and our relationship had always been professionally cordial. He was 15 years older, a Harvard MBA who joined the firm straight out of business school and worked his way up to vice president of portfolio management. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed, Marcus projected the kind of old-money confidence that impressed clients and intimidated subordinates. He drove a Tesla Model S, wore custom suits, and name-dropped his country club memberships with the casual ease of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. For 5 years, Marcus had been a demanding but fair supervisor. He pushed me to excel, gave me increasingly complex assignments, and eventually recommended me for the senior analyst position. I respected his expertise and appreciated his mentorship, even if his management style sometimes felt paternalistic. He had a habit of explaining things I already knew and taking credit for ideas that originated from his team, but those seemed like minor flaws in an otherwise supportive working relationship. Everything changed the day after my promotion was announced. I arrived at the office early, as was my habit, carrying coffee and a sense of excitement about starting my new role. The previous senior analyst had left for a position at Goldman Sachs, and I'd been preparing for weeks to take over his responsibilities managing high-net-worth client portfolios. I'd studied every account, memorized client preferences, and developed strategies to improve performance across the board. Marcus was waiting in my new corner office when I arrived, standing behind what was now my desk with an expression I couldn't quite read. Instead of the congratulations I expected, he gestured toward a stack of files on the conference table. "Rachel, we need to discuss your new responsibilities," he said, his tone more formal than usual. "The senior analyst position comes with additional duties that weren't outlined in the job description." I set down my coffee and approached the table, assuming he was referring to administrative tasks or client relationship management responsibilities. What I found instead were files labeled with mundane operational details: office supplies, inventory, cleaning schedules, maintenance requests, and catering coordination for client meetings. "I don't understand," I said, flipping through documents that had nothing to do with financial analysis. These look like office management tasks. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't the warm expression I was used to seeing. There was something calculating in his eyes, a coolness that made me suddenly uncomfortable. The senior analyst position requires someone who understands all aspects of office operations. You'll be managing these administrative functions in addition to your analytical duties. The explanation didn't make sense. The previous senior analyst had never handled office management. Those responsibilities belonged to our operations coordinator, Maria Santos, who'd been efficiently managing facilities and supplies for the past decade. I'd never heard of a senior financial position that included inventory management and cleaning schedules. Marcus, I think there might be some confusion, I said carefully. When we discussed the promotion, you mentioned portfolio management and client relationship responsibilities. These administrative tasks seem outside the scope of a senior analyst role. His smile faded completely. Rachel, I think you're misunderstanding your position here. The promotion comes with whatever responsibilities I assign. If you're not comfortable with the full range of duties, perhaps we should reconsider whether you're ready for senior-level responsibilities. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Accept these bizarre additional duties, or lose the promotion I'd worked 5 years to earn. I looked at the files again, trying to process what was happening. Nothing about this made professional sense, but challenging my supervisor on my second day in the new role felt like career suicide. Of course, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. I just want to make sure I understand all my responsibilities clearly. Excellent, Marcus said, his satisfied tone suggesting he'd expected resistance. Maria will be transitioning to a part-time role, so you'll be taking over most of her duties immediately. I've prepared a schedule for you. He handed me a laminated sheet that looked like something designed for entry-level administrative staff. Daily tasks included checking supply closets, coordinating with cleaning services, managing the break room coffee station, and ensuring conference rooms were properly set up for meetings. Weekly responsibilities involved inventory counts, supply ordering, and facilities maintenance coordination. Monthly duties included deep cleaning oversight and vendor relationship management. I stared at the schedule, trying to reconcile these menial tasks with my advanced degrees and 5 years of successful financial analysis experience. The disconnect was so jarring it felt surreal, like someone had handed me a script for the wrong play. This seems quite comprehensive, I managed to say. How should I balance these administrative duties with my analytical responsibilities? You're smart, Marcus replied with a shrug. You'll figure it out. The Goldman account review is due Friday, and the Martinez portfolio needs.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Rebalancing by next week. Oh, and the coffee station needs restocking this afternoon. With that, he left me standing in my corner office, surrounded by supply inventories and cleaning schedules, trying to understand what had just happened to my career trajectory. The promotion I'd celebrated 24 hours earlier was beginning to feel like an elaborate practical joke. I spent the rest of that first day attempting to juggle financial analysis with office management tasks that felt designed to humiliate rather than utilize my skills. Between reviewing investment portfolios, I found myself counting paper clips and checking whether the men's restroom had adequate soap dispensers. The absurdity was overwhelming, but I told myself it was temporary, a hazing ritual that would end once I proved I could handle additional responsibilities. That afternoon, while I was restocking coffee supplies in the break room, I overheard a conversation between 2 junior analysts that stopped me cold. "Did you hear about Rachel's new duties?" one of them said. Not realizing I was within earshot, Marcus told everyone in the morning meeting that senior analysts need to understand all aspects of office operations, the other replied. But honestly, it sounds like he's treating her like a glorified secretary. The previous senior analyst never did any of that stuff. Jim's responsibilities were purely analytical. Yeah, but Jim was different. You know how it is. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Jim was different because Jim was a man. The administrative duties weren't part of the senior analyst position. They were part of Marcus's plan to keep me in a subordinate role despite my promotion. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me standing in the break room with a bag of coffee beans in my hands, and the sudden understanding that my career advancement had been designed as an elaborate form of professional sabotage. I finished restocking the coffee station mechanically, my mind racing through the implications of what I'd overheard. If Marcus was deliberately assigning me menial tasks to undermine my authority, then every day I accepted these responsibilities without challenge was a day I allowed him to establish a precedent that would be increasingly difficult to reverse. But challenging him directly felt equally impossible. Marcus had been with Meridian for 12 years and had significant influence with senior management. I was the newest senior analyst, still in my probationary period, and completely dependent on his recommendation for performance reviews. Pushing back too aggressively could result in losing not just the promotion, but my job entirely. That evening, I stayed late to complete the financial analysis work that should have been my primary responsibility. While my colleagues attended a networking event for portfolio managers, I sat in my corner office reviewing client accounts and trying to develop strategies that would demonstrate my analytical capabilities despite the administrative burden Marcus had imposed. Around 9 o'clock, as I was finalizing the Goldman account review, Marcus appeared in my doorway. He'd changed from his business suit into casual clothes and looked relaxed in a way that suggested he'd already been to the networking event. "Still here, Rachel?" he asked, though the question felt more like an observation than genuine concern. "Just finishing the Goldman review," I replied, not looking up from my computer screen. "I want to make sure it's comprehensive." "Good," he said, stepping into my office uninvited. "Though I should mention the cleaning crew noticed some issues in the executive restrooms today. The facilities need more attention." I finally looked up, trying to read his expression. Should I contact the cleaning service about improving their standards? Marcus smiled, and again there was something unsettling about the expression. "Actually, I think hands-on oversight would be more effective. Starting tomorrow, I'd like you to personally inspect and maintain the executive facilities as part of your administrative duties." The request was so inappropriate, it took me a moment to process what he'd actually said. He wanted me, a senior financial analyst with advanced degrees and 5 years of experience, to personally clean executive restrooms. The suggestion was so far beyond reasonable professional expectations that I wondered if I'd misunderstood him. "I'm sorry, could you clarify what you mean by personally maintain?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "I mean ensuring they meet executive standards through direct involvement," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting this was a perfectly normal request. Attention to detail, quality control, that sort of thing. We stared at each other across my desk, and I realized this was a test, not of my administrative capabilities or attention to detail, but of how much degradation I would accept in exchange for keeping my promotion. Marcus was systematically stripping away my professional dignity to see how far he could push before I broke. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. "I'll make sure the facilities meet appropriate standards." "Excellent," Marcus said, his satisfaction obvious. "I knew you'd understand the importance of comprehensive oversight." After he left, I sat alone in my corner office staring at financial reports that suddenly felt meaningless. The promotion I'd worked years to achieve was being transformed into an elaborate form of professional torture, designed to force me to quit or accept a permanently subordinate role. Either outcome would allow Marcus to claim that women weren't suited for senior positions at Meridian. But as I packed up my work that night, a different kind of calculation began forming in my mind. Marcus had made a critical error in his assessment of my character. He saw me as someone who would either break under pressure or quietly accept whatever humiliation he imposed. What he didn't realize was that my real estate investments had taught me patience, strategic thinking, and the value of information. If Marcus wanted to play games with my professional dignity, I would learn to play games too. But my version would have rules he didn't understand, and consequences he couldn't anticipate. I drove home that night through the Seattle drizzle, past the duplex that had been my first real estate investment, past the apartment building where I collected rent from 6 different tenants, past properties I'd researched and analyzed and acquired through careful planning and patient execution. My investment portfolio was worth more than my annual salary at Meridian, built through the same analytical skills Marcus was now trying to diminish. The irony was perfect. While he was focused on making me clean toilets, I was quietly building the kind of financial independence that would make his opinions irrelevant. I just needed to be patient enough to let him reveal his true character while I documented every inappropriate request and every professional humiliation he imposed. By the time I reached my downtown condo, I'd made a decision that would define everything that happened next. If Marcus wanted to treat me like a subordinate, I would play the role convincingly while gathering the information I needed to destroy his authority completely. The game was just beginning, and he had no idea what kind of opponent he was facing. The next morning arrived with the kind of relentless rain that made Seattle feel like it was washing itself clean. I dressed carefully in a business suit that projected competence and professionalism, then packed a separate bag with cleaning supplies I'd purchased on my way home the previous night. If Marcus wanted me to personally maintain executive facilities, I would do exactly what he asked while documenting every degrading moment for future use. I arrived at the office early, as always, and spent the first hour completing legitimate financial analysis work before addressing the administrative tasks Marcus had assigned. The Goldman account review was nearly finished, and I'd identified several opportunities to improve portfolio performance through strategic rebalancing. Despite the administrative burden, my analytical work remained sharp and insightful. At 8:30, I made my first inspection of the executive restrooms. The facilities were already clean, maintained by a professional service that visited every evening. There was absolutely no justification for additional cleaning beyond Marcus's apparent desire to humiliate me. But I documented the condition of every surface, noting supply levels and any minor maintenance needs in a detailed report that would demonstrate the absurdity of his request. Then I did something that would have surprised Marcus if he'd been watching. I cleaned the already clean facilities with the thoroughness of someone who understood that excellence in small things often translates to excellence in important things. If I was going to be forced into this degrading role, I would perform it so competently that no one could question my attention to detail or work ethic. The first executive to use the restrooms after my cleaning was James Morrison, the firm's managing partner. He emerged looking slightly confused and stopped by my office 20 minutes later. "Rachel," he said, standing in my doorway with a puzzled expression, "did you have something to do with the executive facilities this morning?" "They're spotless, beyond anything I've seen from our regular cleaning service. Marcus asked me to oversee facilities maintenance as part of my expanded senior analyst responsibilities," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I believe in thorough attention to detail." James nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he found something odd about the arrangement. "Well, the attention to detail is certainly appreciated. How are you finding the transition to senior responsibilities?" "Challenging but educational," I said, which was true in ways he couldn't imagine. "I'm learning a great deal about all aspects of office operations." After James left, I returned to my financial analysis work with a growing sense of clarity about the situation I was navigating. Marcus's plan to humiliate me was backfiring in ways he hadn't anticipated. By performing degrading tasks with obvious competence and professionalism, I was highlighting the inappropriateness of the assignments rather than accepting subordination. The morning passed quickly as I balanced portfolio analysis with increasingly absurd administrative duties. Marcus had left a note requesting that I personally inventory office supplies, coordinate catering for an afternoon client meeting, and research new coffee providers for the break room. Each task was designed to emphasize my subordinate status, but I approached them with the same analytical rigor I applied to financial research. By lunchtime, I'd completed the Goldman account review, identified supply chain inefficiencies that could save the firm thousands annually, and developed a comprehensive facilities management protocol that exceeded anything the previous operations coordinator had implemented. If Marcus wanted to judge me on administrative performance, I would give him standards he couldn't match. But the real test came that afternoon during the client meeting I'd been asked to coordinate catering for. Marcus was presenting investment strategies to Harrison Development, a major real estate firm considering a substantial portfolio management contract. I'd arranged catering, set up the conference room, and ensured every detail met executive standards. What I hadn't expected was for Marcus to call me into the meeting halfway through his presentation. "Rachel," he said, gesturing toward me as I entered the conference room carrying fresh coffee service. I'd like you to meet our senior analyst, who's been personally overseeing the operational details for today's meeting. The introduction was crafted to emphasize my role as support staff, rather than analytical professional, but the Harrison development executive seemed more interested in my background than my catering coordination. Senior analyst, said Patricia Harrison, the firm's CEO. What's your area of expertise? Real estate finance and investment strategy, I replied, setting down the coffee service and straightening to address her directly. I specialize in portfolio optimization and risk assessment for real estate investments. Interesting, Patricia said, glancing at Marcus with a slightly puzzled expression. We're actually looking for expertise in exactly that area. What's your take on the current commercial real estate market in the Pacific Northwest? The question launched me into the kind of analytical discussion I'd been trained for, and I found myself explaining market trends, investment opportunities, and risk factors with the expertise I'd developed through years of professional experience and personal investment. Patricia and her team asked increasingly detailed questions, and I answered with the confidence of someone who understood both theoretical frameworks and practical implementation. Marcus's discomfort was obvious as the conversation continued. He'd intended to showcase my subordinate role, but instead I was demonstrating analytical capabilities that impressed potential clients. When Patricia asked for my assessment of specific downtown Seattle properties, I was able to provide detailed insights based on my own research and investment experience. This is exactly the kind of expertise we're looking for, Patricia told Marcus after I'd answered several complex questions about market positioning and investment timing. Rachel's analysis is sophisticated and practical. She clearly understands both the financial and operational aspects of real estate investment. Yes, Marcus replied, though his smile looked strained. Rachel has been expanding her skill set through additional operational responsibilities. Well, the operational knowledge clearly enhances her analytical perspective, Patricia said. I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss our portfolio in more detail. Will Rachel be involved in the account management? Marcus hesitated, and I realized he was trapped by his own strategy. He couldn't admit that he'd been assigning me janitorial duties without revealing his inappropriate management practices. But he also couldn't deny my analytical capabilities after I'd just demonstrated them convincingly. Of course, he said finally. Rachel will be fully involved in account management. After the Harrison development team left, Marcus and I found ourselves alone in the conference room. The tension was immediately palpable, and I could see anger flickering behind his professional composure. That was an impressive performance, he said, his tone suggesting the compliment was anything but genuine. Though I hope you remember that client relations are my responsibility to manage. Absolutely, I replied. I was just answering their questions about market analysis. In the future, Marcus continued, I'd prefer if you limited your responses to areas where you have direct experience. Real estate investment can be complex, and we don't want to overstate our expertise. The condescension was breathtaking. Marcus was suggesting I'd overstepped by demonstrating knowledge in my actual area of professional expertise, while simultaneously assigning me tasks that had nothing to do with financial analysis. The contradiction was so obvious it felt like parody. Of course, I said again, maintaining the deferential tone that seemed to satisfy his need for control. I'll be more careful about staying within my lane. But privately, I was beginning to understand the scope of Marcus's insecurity. He wasn't just threatened by my competence. He was actively working to limit my professional development because my success highlighted his own mediocrity. The Harrison development meeting had demonstrated that I could handle senior-level client relationships independently, which undermined his narrative about my need for additional supervision and administrative responsibilities. That evening, I stayed late again to complete the work Marcus had assigned while researching Harrison Development's real estate portfolio. Their investment strategy was sophisticated but conservative, focused on low-risk properties with steady returns rather than the higher-yield opportunities I specialized in identifying. I could add significant value to their investment approach, but only if Marcus allowed me to function as a legitimate senior analyst rather than a glorified administrative assistant. As I was preparing to leave, I discovered something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. While reviewing client files for the next day's meetings, I came across Marcus's personal information in our executive contact database. The entry included his home address, emergency contacts, and financial details relevant to his employment benefits. His address was 4847 Lakeshore Drive, a prestigious waterfront neighborhood I knew well from my real estate investments. The property was worth approximately $2 million, a substantial home even by Seattle standards. What caught my attention wasn't the value but the address itself. I'd seen that property recently in my mortgage portfolio research. Out of curiosity, I accessed my personal investment files on my phone and searched for the address. What I found made my pulse quicken with possibilities I hadn't imagined. 4847 Lakeshore Drive was one of the 12 properties where I held private mortgages through my investment company, Martinez Holdings, LLC. Marcus Richardson, my supervisor who was systematically humiliating me with janitorial duties, was making monthly mortgage payments to a company I owned. The mortgage had been purchased 18 months earlier as part of a distressed debt package. The previous lender, a small regional bank, had sold several underperforming loans to investors rather than dealing with complicated restructuring negotiations. I'd acquired Marcus's mortgage along with 11 others, offering better terms than the struggling borrowers could get elsewhere, while securing steady returns on my investment. Marcus had been making payments reliably, and I'd never connected the name on the mortgage documents with my supervisor at Meridian. Richardson was common enough that the coincidence hadn't occurred to me, and our business relationship was handled entirely through my property management company. He had no idea that his monthly mortgage payments were building my real estate investment portfolio. The irony was so perfect it felt like cosmic justice. While Marcus was forcing me to clean toilets and inventory office supplies, he was unknowingly paying me $8,000 every month through his mortgage. The power dynamic he thought he controlled was actually inverted in ways he couldn't imagine. But the discovery was more than just ironic. It was strategically valuable. Mortgage agreements included provisions for acceleration in cases of default, property inspection rights, and detailed financial disclosures. If Marcus continued to create a hostile work environment, I had leverage he didn't know existed. More importantly, I had information about his financial situation that could be useful if our professional relationship deteriorated further. I spent the next hour reviewing the mortgage documents in detail, refreshing my memory about terms, payment schedules, and default provisions. The loan was structured as a 15-year note with a current balance of approximately $400,000. Marcus's payments were current, but the agreement included standard clauses about maintaining property insurance, paying property taxes on time, and providing financial disclosures upon request. Most interestingly, the mortgage included a provision I'd insisted on for all my loans: quarterly financial reviews to ensure the borrower's ability to continue payments. I could request updated income statements, employment verification, and credit reports at any time. Given that Marcus's employment at Meridian was his primary income source, any professional difficulties could affect his ability to service the debt. The power dynamic was shifting in ways Marcus couldn't anticipate. Tomorrow, I would continue playing the role of the subordinate employee accepting degrading assignments. But now I was playing with information that could change everything if the situation escalated beyond professional humiliation into something that threatened my career. I drove home that night with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt since starting my real estate investment business. Marcus thought he was teaching me about my place in the corporate hierarchy, but he was actually providing me with opportunities to demonstrate patience, strategic thinking, and long-term planning. Skills that would serve me well in whatever came next. The rain had stopped, and Seattle's city lights reflected off wet streets like possibilities waiting to be explored. Tomorrow would bring new humiliations and inappropriate assignments, but I would meet them with the confidence of someone who understood that information was power, patience was strategy, and sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who looked like they were losing. Marcus Richardson had no idea what kind of game he'd started, but I was beginning to understand exactly how it would end. The discovery of Marcus's mortgage transformed my perspective entirely, but I knew that acting impulsively would destroy any advantage I'd gained. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian with the same professional demeanor I'd maintained since my promotion, carrying myself like someone who had accepted her expanded administrative responsibilities with grace. Marcus was waiting in my office again, this time with a clipboard and what appeared to be a facilities inspection checklist. Rachel, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding hands-on oversight, he said, setting the clipboard on my desk with obvious satisfaction. I've developed a more comprehensive approach to facilities management that will really showcase your attention to detail. I examined the checklist he'd prepared, and my stomach tightened with each item I read. Daily restroom inspections with detailed cleanliness reports. Weekly deep cleaning of executive facilities. Monthly carpet shampooing oversight. Quarterly equipment maintenance supervision. The list was designed to humiliate me, while creating a paper trail that would justify treating me like custodial staff, rather than a senior financial analyst. This is quite thorough, I said, maintaining my neutral tone while photographing the checklist with my phone. You've clearly put considerable thought into operational efficiency. Marcus beamed at what he interpreted as compliant acceptance. I knew you'd appreciate the systematic approach. The first inspection should be completed by 10 this morning, and I'll need your written report by noon. After he left, I sat in my corner office studying the checklist while processing the implications of what Marcus was orchestrating. He wasn't just creating a hostile work environment, he was building documentation that would support his narrative about my role at the firm. If I complained to human resources or senior management, he could point to months of administrative assignments that I'd apparently accepted willingly. But Marcus had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed I was documenting these humiliating tasks because I was resigned to accepting them permanently. What he didn't realize was that I was gathering evidence of discriminatory treatment while simultaneously building my own leverage through information he didn't know I possessed. I spent the next hour completing legitimate financial analysis work before addressing Marcus's facilities inspection requirements. The executive restrooms were, as expected, already immaculate thanks to professional cleaning services. But I conducted the inspection with forensic thoroughness, photographing every surface and documenting supply levels with the precision of someone preparing for legal proceedings. The written report I submitted to Marcus at noon was a masterpiece of professional compliance and subtle documentation. I described facilities that exceeded reasonable cleanliness standards, noted the excellent work of existing cleaning services, and included recommendations for efficiency improvements that would reduce costs while maintaining quality. Anyone reading the report would immediately understand that additional cleaning oversight was unnecessary and potentially discriminatory. Marcus read through my report with growing irritation, clearly expecting either sloppy work that would justify criticism or evidence of actual problems that would validate his demands for personal cleaning supervision. Instead, he found competent analysis that highlighted the absurdity of his requests. "This is very detailed," he said finally, his tone suggesting disappointment rather than approval. "Though I think you may have missed some areas that need attention. Could you point out the specific concerns?" I asked, pulling out my phone to reference the photographs I'd taken during the inspection. I documented everything quite thoroughly. Marcus hesitated, realizing he couldn't identify legitimate problems without admitting that his demands were unreasonable. "Well, sometimes issues aren't immediately visible. I think continued monitoring will reveal areas for improvement." "Of course," I replied. "Should I schedule follow-up inspections based on any particular concerns? Or would you prefer daily reports regardless of actual conditions?" The question forced Marcus to choose between admitting his requests were punitive rather than operational, or doubling down on obviously inappropriate demands. He chose the latter, confirming my assessment of his character while providing additional evidence of discriminatory treatment. "Daily reports, regardless of conditions," he said. Consistency is important in quality management. That afternoon, while completing portfolio analysis for 3 different client accounts, I received an unexpected call from Patricia Harrison of Harrison Development. She wanted to schedule the follow-up meeting she'd mentioned, specifically requesting my involvement in reviewing their current investment strategy and identifying opportunities for improvement. "Your analysis yesterday was exactly what we're looking for," Patricia explained. "Our current portfolio management has been adequate, but we're interested in more sophisticated strategies that could enhance returns while managing risk appropriately." I scheduled the meeting for the following week, knowing that Marcus would have difficulty objecting to client requests without revealing his attempts to limit my professional development. The Harrison account represented exactly the kind of high-value client relationship that could establish my reputation as a senior analyst, regardless of whatever administrative duties Marcus continued to assign. But the real breakthrough came later that week, when I decided to conduct more thorough research into Marcus's financial situation using the information access rights included in his mortgage agreement. As the holder of his loan, I was entitled to verify his employment status, income stability, and overall financial health to ensure continued payment capability. The financial disclosure I requested revealed details about Marcus's situation that fundamentally changed my understanding of our power dynamic. His mortgage payments represented nearly 40% of his monthly income, a percentage that most financial advisors would consider dangerously high. He'd refinanced twice in the past 5 years, each time extracting equity to fund lifestyle expenses that exceeded his actual earning capacity. More significantly, Marcus's employment contract at Meridian included performance clauses that could affect his compensation and job security. His salary was structured with substantial bonus components tied to client retention and portfolio performance. If major clients like Harrison Development expressed dissatisfaction with account management, Marcus's income could be reduced dramatically, potentially affecting his ability to service his mortgage debt. The information was professionally explosive, but I knew that using it prematurely would be both unethical and strategically foolish. Instead, I filed the financial disclosure with other mortgage documentation and continued documenting Marcus's discriminatory treatment while building relationships with clients who appreciated my analytical capabilities. The pattern of humiliation continued to escalate over the following weeks. Marcus began requesting increasingly degrading tasks, always framed as legitimate administrative responsibilities, but clearly designed to establish my subordinate status. I was asked to personally restock supply closets, coordinate janitorial schedules, manage coffee service for client meetings, and handle catering arrangements that had previously been managed by administrative staff. Each assignment was carefully documented in reports that demonstrated both my competent completion of unnecessary tasks and the inappropriate nature of the requests themselves. I photographed supply closets before and after restocking, timed janitorial coordination activities to demonstrate efficiency, and included cost-benefit analyses that showed how these administrative duties interfered with more valuable financial analysis work. The documentation served multiple purposes. It provided evidence of discriminatory treatment for potential legal proceedings, demonstrated my professional competence regardless of task assignment, and created a paper trail that would be difficult for Marcus to explain if questioned by senior management or human resources. But the real power shift occurred during my follow-up meeting with Harrison Development. Patricia arrived with her entire executive team, ready to discuss comprehensive portfolio restructuring that could represent millions in managed assets for Meridian. Marcus had planned to lead the presentation himself, positioning me as support staff responsible for logistics and note-taking. The meeting began according to Marcus's script, with him presenting standard portfolio management strategies that emphasized stability and conservative growth. But Patricia interrupted his presentation halfway through with questions that revealed her sophisticated understanding of real estate investment principles. "These strategies seem quite traditional," she observed. "We're specifically interested in more innovative approaches that could enhance returns through strategic risk management. Rachel mentioned yesterday that she specializes in identifying higher yield opportunities." Marcus looked uncomfortable as attention shifted toward me, but he couldn't redirect the conversation without appearing unresponsive to client needs. "Rachel has been developing expertise in alternative investment strategies," he said carefully, "though these approaches require considerable oversight. Could you elaborate on these alternative strategies?" Patricia asked, addressing me directly despite Marcus's attempt to maintain control of the presentation. I launched into a detailed analysis of real estate investment opportunities that combined my professional training with insights gained through personal property management experience. I discussed market inefficiencies, undervalued asset classes, and strategic approaches to portfolio diversification that could significantly enhance returns while maintaining appropriate risk levels. The Harrison team asked increasingly sophisticated questions, and I found myself presenting investment strategies that went far beyond anything Marcus had prepared. When Patricia requested specific recommendations for their portfolio, I was able to provide detailed analysis based on properties I'd personally researched and market trends I'd been tracking through my own investments. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we're looking for," Patricia told Marcus after I'd completed a comprehensive presentation that had lasted nearly an hour. Rachel's approach combines theoretical knowledge with practical market insight in ways that could really benefit our investment strategy. Marcus smiled tightly, clearly struggling to maintain professional composure, while watching me demonstrate capabilities that exceeded his own expertise in areas critical to the Harrison account. Rachel has certainly been expanding her knowledge base through additional responsibilities. Well, whatever those responsibilities are, they're clearly enhancing her analytical perspective, Patricia replied. "I'd like to move forward with having Rachel lead the account management for our portfolio restructuring." The request was a direct challenge to Marcus's authority, and a validation of my professional capabilities that he couldn't dismiss or diminish. But accepting Patricia's request would undermine his narrative about my need for additional supervision and administrative duties. "Of course," Marcus said finally, unable to refuse a major client request without damaging his own professional standing. "Rachel will have full responsibility for account management." After the Harrison team left, Marcus and I found ourselves alone in the conference room, with tensions so thick it felt tangible. I could see him struggling to process what had just happened, trying to reconcile his attempts to diminish my professional status with the client's explicit preference for my expertise over his. "That was quite a presentation," he said, his voice carefully controlled but with an undertone of barely contained anger. "Though I hope you understand that account management involves more than just analytical work." "Absolutely," I replied, maintaining the deferential tone that had served me well, while gathering evidence of his discriminatory behavior. "I appreciate the opportunity to apply the comprehensive operational knowledge I've been developing." The response was perfectly calibrated to highlight the connection between his demeaning administrative assignments and my enhanced professional capabilities. If Marcus complained about my account management performance, he would have to acknowledge that the skills I'd developed through custodial duties and supply management had somehow prepared me for sophisticated client relationships. But I could see in his expression that he was beginning to realize his strategy had backfired. Instead of breaking my confidence or forcing me to quit, his humiliating assignments had provided me with opportunities to demonstrate competence under pressure while building relationships with important clients who valued my expertise. Over the next few days, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic as he struggled to reassert control over a situation that was slipping beyond his influence. He began micromanaging my schedule more aggressively, questioning every client interaction and demanding detailed reports on activities that had previously required no oversight. The escalation provided additional evidence of retaliatory behavior, but it also suggested that Marcus was feeling genuinely threatened by my growing professional independence. When I requested time to visit Harrison Development's properties for first-hand portfolio assessment, he initially refused, claiming that administrative duties required my presence in the office. "The Harrison account is important," I pointed out, and Patricia specifically requested comprehensive property analysis. "Site visits are standard practice for portfolio management." Marcus hesitated, trapped between his desire to limit my activities and his need to maintain client satisfaction. "I suppose site visits could be arranged," he said finally, "though they'll need to be coordinated with your other responsibilities." The compromise allowed me to conduct the property assessments Harrison Development had requested while continuing to document Marcus's attempts to interfere with legitimate client service activities. But more importantly, the site visits provided opportunities to evaluate real estate investments using expertise I'd developed through personal property management. What I discovered during those property assessments changed my understanding of both the Harrison account and my own strategic position. Several properties in their portfolio were significantly undervalued based on market trends I'd been tracking through my own investments. More interesting, 2 of the properties were in neighborhoods where I'd been considering expansion of my personal real estate holdings. The convergence of professional and personal interests created opportunities I hadn't anticipated. If I could help Harrison Development optimize their portfolio performance through strategic recommendations, I would enhance my reputation as a senior analyst, while potentially identifying investment opportunities for my own company. But the real revelation came when I discovered that one of Harrison Development's properties was directly adjacent to a building where I held a private mortgage. The property owner had been struggling with payments and had approached me about restructuring his loan terms. If Harrison Development was interested in expanding their portfolio, I could potentially structure a deal that would benefit all parties, while demonstrating my ability to identify unique investment opportunities. The complexity of managing these intersecting interests required exactly the kind of strategic thinking and long-term planning that Marcus claimed I lacked. But I was beginning to understand that my real estate investment experience had prepared me for financial analysis challenges that went far beyond anything he could teach or evaluate. That evening, I stayed late to prepare a comprehensive analysis of Harrison Development's portfolio that would incorporate insights from both my professional research and personal investment experience. The analysis identified undervalued assets, suggested optimization strategies, and recommended expansion opportunities that could significantly enhance returns while managing risk appropriately. But as I was completing the analysis, I received a call that changed everything. Patricia Harrison wanted to schedule an emergency meeting to discuss a time-sensitive investment opportunity that had just become available. A major commercial property was being offered at below-market pricing due to the owner's urgent need for liquidity, and Harrison Development needed sophisticated analysis within 24 hours to determine whether to pursue the acquisition. The property in question was the building adjacent to my mortgage holding, the same one I'd been considering for personal investment. The coincidence was so perfect it felt like destiny intervening in ways that would test every aspect of my professional ethics and strategic planning abilities. I agreed to the emergency meeting, knowing that this situation would require me to navigate complex conflicts of interest while demonstrating analytical capabilities that could establish my reputation permanently. But I also knew that Marcus would view any major client success as a threat to his authority and would likely escalate his retaliatory behavior in response. The next morning, I arrived at the office early to review property records and market analysis before the Harrison Development meeting. But Marcus was waiting in my office with an expression that suggested he'd already learned about the emergency client consultation. "I understand you scheduled a client meeting without clearing it through proper channels," he said, his tone suggesting this represented some kind of policy violation. Patricia Harrison called with a time-sensitive opportunity that required immediate analysis, I explained. The property acquisition window is only open for 24 hours. Client relationships need to be managed carefully, Marcus replied. I think it would be appropriate for me to attend this meeting to ensure proper oversight. The suggestion felt like a threat, and I realized that Marcus was positioning himself to interfere with my client relationship at exactly the moment when demonstrating independent competence was most critical. But I also understood that objecting too strongly would provide him with evidence of insubordination that could be used to justify disciplinary action. Of course, I said. Though Patricia specifically requested technical analysis that might benefit from preparation time if you'd like to review the property details in advance. The offer was designed to highlight Marcus's lack of specialized real estate knowledge while appearing to defer to his authority. If he attended the meeting without preparation, his limited expertise would be obvious to sophisticated clients. If he spent time preparing, he would be forced to acknowledge that the analysis required capabilities he'd been trying to diminish. Marcus chose to attend the meeting without preparation, confirming my assessment of his character while providing an opportunity to demonstrate my superior expertise in front of important clients. The Harrison Development team arrived precisely on time, carrying property documents and financial projections that suggested they'd already conducted preliminary analysis. Thank you for accommodating our urgent timeline, Patricia said as we gathered in the conference room. This property represents exactly the kind of strategic acquisition we've been seeking, but we need sophisticated analysis to determine appropriate pricing and financing structure. Marcus began the meeting with generic comments about due diligence and risk assessment, but it quickly became apparent that he lacked the specialized knowledge necessary to evaluate complex real estate investments. When Patricia asked specific questions about market comparables, zoning considerations, and financing alternatives, he deferred to me with obvious reluctance. I presented a comprehensive analysis that incorporated property values, market trends, financing options, and strategic considerations that went far beyond anything Marcus could have prepared. The Harrison team asked increasingly detailed questions, and I found myself demonstrating expertise that established my credibility as a senior analyst, while highlighting Marcus's limitations in real estate investment analysis. But the real test came when Patricia asked for my recommendation about the acquisition price and financing structure. The property was being offered at $800,000, approximately 15% below market value. Based on my analysis, Harrison Development could justify acquisition at the asking price and potentially negotiate even more favorable terms given the seller's urgency. However, my personal knowledge of the adjacent property situation suggested that the seller's financial distress was more severe than publicly acknowledged. If Harrison Development was willing to be patient, they might be able to acquire both properties through coordinated negotiations that would create synergistic value while helping distressed property owners avoid foreclosure. The recommendation required me to share insights gained through personal investment experience without revealing potential conflicts of interest. I suggested that Harrison Development consider a phased acquisition strategy that would allow them to evaluate the seller's actual flexibility while positioning themselves for potential expansion opportunities. This kind of strategic thinking is exactly why we wanted Rachel leading our account management, Patricia told Marcus after I'd presented detailed acquisition recommendations. Her analysis combines market knowledge with creative problem-solving in ways that could really benefit our investment strategy. Marcus nodded stiffly, unable to object to client praise without appearing unprofessional, but clearly frustrated by my demonstration of capabilities that exceeded his own expertise. The meeting concluded with Harrison Development accepting my recommendations and requesting follow-up analysis for implementing the acquisition strategy. After the clients left, Marcus and I remained in the conference room with tension that felt explosive. I could see him struggling to process what had just happened, trying to reconcile his narrative about my subordinate status with evidence of professional competence that impressed sophisticated clients. "That was quite a performance," he said finally, his tone making it clear that he didn't consider professional competence something to celebrate. "Thank you," I replied, maintaining my deferential demeanor while internally preparing for whatever retaliation he was planning. Though I think it's important to remember that client relationships require ongoing management, not just individual presentations, Marcus continued. There are aspects of account oversight that extend beyond analytical work. I nodded attentively, recognizing that he was setting up justification for continued interference with my professional development, but I also understood that his obvious discomfort with my success was providing additional evidence of retaliatory behavior that would strengthen any future complaints about discriminatory treatment. The next few days passed in a blur of legitimate account management work, combined with increasingly absurd administrative assignments that Marcus seemed to be inventing out of desperation to reassert his authority. I was asked to personally inventory office supplies daily, coordinate facilities maintenance for problems that didn't exist, and prepare detailed reports on janitorial services that were already functioning efficiently. Each assignment was documented with the same thoroughness I applied to financial analysis, creating a comprehensive record of discriminatory treatment that would be difficult to explain as legitimate business necessity. But more importantly, I was building relationships with clients who valued my expertise while gathering information about Marcus's vulnerabilities that could be deployed if the situation escalated beyond professional humiliation. The turning point came when Marcus made a critical error that revealed the true scope of his insecurity and desperation. During a staff meeting where he was presenting quarterly performance reviews, he decided to publicly address what he called the importance of understanding hierarchical relationships in professional environments. "Some team members have been demonstrating excellent technical capabilities," he announced, looking directly at me while addressing the entire office. "But technical competence must be balanced with appropriate respect for supervisory oversight and willingness to accept comprehensive responsibility assignments." The language was carefully crafted to appear professional while clearly targeting my situation, but several colleagues exchanged glances that suggested they found his comments inappropriate. James Morrison, the managing partner, looked particularly uncomfortable as Marcus continued his presentation. "For example," Marcus said, warming to his theme, "our senior analyst position includes operational oversight responsibilities that ensure comprehensive understanding of all aspects of office management. This integrated approach produces better analytical results because it grounds theoretical knowledge in practical operational experience. I sat quietly taking notes while Marcus essentially admitted to the entire office that he'd been assigning me custodial duties as part of a senior analyst position. His attempt to justify discriminatory treatment was providing witnesses to behavior that violated every principle of equal employment opportunity. After the meeting, James Morrison stopped by my office with an expression that suggested he was beginning to understand the situation I'd been navigating. "Rachel," he said, closing my office door behind him, "I wanted to follow up on Marcus's comments about operational oversight responsibilities. Could you help me understand exactly what kinds of additional duties you've been handling?" The question was clearly prompted by concern about potential liability issues, and I realized that Marcus's public justification of discriminatory treatment had created an opportunity to address the situation through proper channels. "I'd be happy to provide a comprehensive overview," I said, pulling out the detailed documentation I'd been maintaining for months. I'd been tracking all additional responsibilities to ensure proper completion and identify efficiency improvements. James reviewed my documentation with increasing alarm, studying photographs of supply closets, custodial schedules, and facilities inspection reports that clearly demonstrated the inappropriate nature of assignments I'd been given. When he reached the daily restroom cleaning requirements, his expression hardened with what appeared to be genuine anger. "This is completely inappropriate," he said finally. "These are not legitimate responsibilities for a senior analyst position, and they certainly shouldn't be assigned based on gender or any other discriminatory criteria." I maintained my neutral expression while internally celebrating the validation of everything I'd been documenting for months. "I've been trying to fulfill all assigned responsibilities while maintaining my analytical duties," I said. "Though the administrative workload has been challenging to balance with client service requirements." "I can imagine," James replied grimly. "I'm going to need to review this situation with human resources and senior management immediately. In the meantime, please discontinue any custodial or facilities management activities and focus entirely on your legitimate analytical responsibilities." The intervention felt like vindication, but I knew that Marcus's response to losing his primary tool for humiliating me would likely involve escalation to more direct forms of retaliation. If he couldn't force me to quit through degrading assignments, he might attempt to undermine my professional credibility through performance criticism or client relationship interference. But I was no longer the overwhelmed employee who'd accepted inappropriate duties out of fear for her career security. Months of documentation, strategic planning, and relationship building had transformed me into someone with leverage Marcus couldn't anticipate and resources he didn't know existed. The final confrontation was approaching, and I was ready for whatever form it might take. James Morrison's intervention should have been the end of Marcus's campaign of professional humiliation, but it only intensified his desperation to reassert control. Within hours of being told to discontinue my custodial assignments, Marcus had scheduled what he called a performance review meeting to address what he termed concerning patterns in my professional development. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon in the executive conference room, with Marcus inviting Patricia Harrison to attend as a client reference for my account management capabilities. On the surface, this appeared to be standard procedure for senior analyst evaluations, but I recognized it as Marcus's attempt to undermine my client relationships before they could become too established to control. Thursday evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting for Marcus's carefully orchestrated performance review, I would force the confrontation on my terms, using information he didn't know I possessed. The mortgage payment on his Lakeshore Drive property was due Monday, and his employment contract included clauses that could affect his ability to service debt obligations if his professional standing at Meridian was compromised. I spent that evening preparing a comprehensive presentation that would expose Marcus's discriminatory behavior while demonstrating my financial analysis capabilities in ways that would be impossible to dismiss or discredit. But the centerpiece of my strategy involved revealing the mortgage relationship that had been hidden in plain sight for 18 months. Friday morning arrived with unusual clarity, as if Seattle's persistent rain had finally decided to give way to sunshine that would illuminate everything that had been obscured by professional politeness and corporate hierarchy. I dressed in my most authoritative business suit, carrying myself with the confidence of someone who finally understood the full scope of her power. Marcus was already in the conference room when I arrived, arranging documents with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he was about to deliver a decisive blow to an opponent who had become inconveniently successful. Patricia Harrison sat across from him, looking professional but slightly puzzled about why her account manager's performance review required client input. "Thank you both for making time for this important discussion," Marcus began, his tone suggesting this was a solemn occasion rather than routine business. "I wanted to address some concerns about Rachel's professional development and ensure that client expectations are being managed appropriately." Patricia glanced at me with confusion, clearly wondering what concerns could possibly exist given the exceptional account management I'd been providing. "I'm not sure I understand," she said. "Rachel's work has exceeded our expectations in every respect. Her analysis has been sophisticated, her recommendations have been profitable, and her client service has been exemplary." Marcus smiled with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. "That's exactly why this conversation is important. Rachel's technical competence is undeniable, but there are aspects of professional judgment and situational awareness that require development before she can handle senior-level responsibilities independently." The condescension was breathtaking, particularly given that I'd been managing Harrison Development's account independently for weeks with outstanding results. But I sat quietly, allowing Marcus to reveal his true character while I prepared to deploy information that would destroy his credibility permanently. "For instance," Marcus continued, "Rachel's recent focus on client relationships has come at the expense of understanding her place within the firm's operational hierarchy. She's been resistant to comprehensive responsibility assignments that would develop her leadership capabilities." "Comprehensive responsibility assignments?" Patricia repeated, clearly not understanding what Marcus was referring to. "Administrative oversight duties that ensure senior analysts understand all aspects of office operations," Marcus explained. "Everything from facilities management to operational coordination. Rachel has shown reluctance to embrace these development opportunities." I watched Patricia's expression change as she began to understand that Marcus was describing custodial duties disguised as professional development. Her confusion transformed into something that looked like disgust as the implications became clear. "Are you saying you assigned Rachel janitorial responsibilities as part of her senior analyst position?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying a chill that suggested she found the concept personally offensive. Marcus hesitated, realizing that his justification sounded even worse when stated directly to a sophisticated client who valued professional competence above administrative compliance. "I'm saying that comprehensive understanding of operational requirements enhances analytical capabilities," he replied, attempting to reframe discriminatory treatment as strategic development. "That's fascinating," I said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. "Because I've been documenting these comprehensive responsibility assignments for months, and I think Patricia might be interested in seeing exactly what kinds of development opportunities you've been providing." I opened my portfolio and withdrew the detailed documentation I'd been maintaining, including photographs of supply closets, custodial schedules, and facilities inspection reports that clearly demonstrated the degrading nature of assignments Marcus had been imposing. Patricia reviewed the materials with increasing horror, studying images that showed me cleaning executive restrooms and inventorying office supplies while holding advanced degrees in finance and real estate law. "This is unconscionable," Patricia said, looking at Marcus with undisguised contempt. "You've been treating a senior financial analyst like custodial staff while she's been providing exceptional account management services. This is textbook workplace discrimination." Marcus's composure finally cracked as he realized that his attempt to discredit me had backfired spectacularly. "These assignments were designed to develop comprehensive operational knowledge," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Designed to humiliate and marginalize," I corrected, maintaining my professional tone while delivering words that cut like surgical instruments. "Which brings me to something interesting I discovered while conducting the comprehensive research you've been encouraging." I opened my laptop and accessed the presentation I'd prepared, displaying the title slide that read, "Financial Analysis and Strategic Relationships, a Case Study in Professional Development." Marcus looked confused, unclear about where I was heading with what appeared to be a standard analytical presentation. One of the most valuable lessons from these months of comprehensive responsibility assignments has been learning to identify patterns and relationships that aren't immediately obvious, I continued, advancing to a slide that showed a map of Seattle real estate holdings. For instance, the connection between professional relationships and personal financial obligations. Patricia leaned forward with interest, recognizing that I was presenting the kind of analytical thinking that had impressed her during our previous meetings. Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable, though he couldn't yet understand why. As part of my real estate investment expertise, I've been tracking property values and mortgage relationships throughout the Seattle area, I explained, highlighting specific neighborhoods on the map. The research has revealed some fascinating connections between professional colleagues and financial interdependencies. I advanced to the next slide, which displayed Marcus's address at 4847 Lakeshore Drive, along with property tax records, mortgage documentation, and payment history. Marcus went pale as he realized what information I was about to reveal. For example, I continued, my voice remaining steady and professional while delivering information that would destroy his authority completely. My supervisor, Marcus Richardson, has been making monthly mortgage payments to Martinez Holdings LLC for the past 18 months. $8,000 every month, representing nearly 40% of his gross income. The silence in the conference room was absolute. Patricia stared at the documentation on screen, processing the implications of what I'd just revealed, while Marcus sat frozen with the expression of someone watching his entire world collapse in real time. Martinez Holdings is my personal real estate investment company, I explained, turning to face Marcus directly, which means that for the past 18 months, while you've been forcing me to clean toilets and inventory office supplies, you've been unknowingly paying me mortgage payments that have helped fund my real estate portfolio. Marcus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his face cycling through expressions of shock, horror, and desperate calculation, as he tried to process the complete inversion of the power dynamic he thought he'd been controlling. But the relationship gets even more interesting, I continued, advancing to financial analysis slides that detailed Marcus's employment contract and compensation structure. Your mortgage agreement includes quarterly financial review requirements, which entitled me to examine your employment terms and income stability to ensure continued payment capability. I displayed Marcus's compensation breakdown, showing the substantial bonus components tied to client retention and performance metrics that could dramatically affect his ability to service debt obligations. Patricia studied the information with the keen attention of someone who understood exactly what leverage I was describing. Your employment contract includes performance clauses that could reduce your compensation by up to 60% if major clients express dissatisfaction with account management, or if you're subject to disciplinary action for discriminatory workplace behavior, I explained. Since your mortgage payments represent such a large percentage of your income, any reduction in compensation could trigger default provisions that would accelerate the entire loan balance. Marcus found his voice finally, though it emerged as a croak rather than the authoritative tone he'd cultivated throughout his career. You can't use private financial information for workplace disputes. This is unethical. Actually, I replied, displaying the mortgage agreement terms on screen, as the holder of your loan, I have explicit rights to monitor your financial stability and employment status. Everything I've presented is legally obtained information that's directly relevant to our professional relationship. Patricia had been studying the documentation with growing fascination, and now she spoke with the authoritative tone of someone who had reached definitive conclusions. Rachel, this is extraordinary analysis that demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking we value in our account management. Marcus, this is appalling behavior that represents everything we try to avoid in professional relationships. She turned to address Marcus directly, her voice carrying the weight of a major client whose opinion could determine his career trajectory. Your systematic harassment of Rachel while she was providing exceptional service to our account is inexcusable. The fact that she was building leverage against your unprofessional behavior while maintaining superior analytical performance demonstrates capabilities that far exceed anything you've shown. Marcus struggled to respond, clearly understanding that Patricia's assessment would be shared with Meridian's senior management and could affect his employment status immediately. This is a mischaracterization of professional development strategies, he said weakly, but the words sounded hollow even to him. No, I said, advancing to the final slide of my presentation, which displayed a comprehensive timeline of discriminatory treatment alongside evidence of superior professional performance. This is documentation of systematic workplace harassment, designed to force a qualified woman to quit rather than succeed in a senior position. The timeline was devastating in its clarity, showing months of inappropriate assignments escalating in parallel with my growing client relationships and professional success. Each custodial duty was dated and documented alongside analytical achievements that demonstrated my capabilities despite Marcus's attempts at sabotage. But here's what's really interesting about our financial relationship, I continued, returning to the mortgage documentation. Your next payment is due Monday morning. Given that Patricia's assessment of your professional behavior will likely be communicated to James Morrison and senior management before then, you should probably consider whether your employment situation will be stable enough to maintain debt service obligations. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. If Marcus's discriminatory behavior resulted in disciplinary action or termination, his reduced income could trigger mortgage default provisions that would allow me to accelerate the loan and potentially foreclose on his property. The irony was perfect. The same financial leverage he'd been unknowingly building through his mortgage payments would become the mechanism of his professional destruction. Marcus's face had progressed from pale to gray as he processed the complete reversal of our power dynamic. For 18 months, he'd believed he was controlling my career trajectory while building his own financial stability. In reality, he'd been funding my investment portfolio while providing me with evidence of discriminatory behavior that could destroy his professional standing. This is blackmail, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. No, Patricia interjected, this is consequences. Rachel has demonstrated that she's been building strategic advantages while maintaining professional excellence despite your inappropriate treatment. Marcus, you've demonstrated that you're unsuitable for supervisory responsibilities and potentially liable for creating a hostile work environment. I closed my laptop and gathered my documentation, maintaining the professional demeanor that had served me throughout months of calculated patience. I'll be recommending to James Morrison that Harrison Development's account management be restructured to reflect actual professional capabilities rather than artificial hierarchical preferences, I said. Patricia, I believe this adjustment will enhance service quality while ensuring appropriate oversight of analytical responsibilities. Patricia nodded approvingly. Absolutely. Rachel should have full authority for our account management, and Marcus should have no involvement in our business relationship moving forward. Marcus sat in stunned silence as his carefully constructed authority crumbled around him. The promotion he'd tried to sabotage had become the foundation for my professional independence, while his attempts at humiliation had provided me with leverage he couldn't overcome. One more thing, I said, pausing at the conference room door. The mortgage payment due Monday includes a late fee structure that compounds daily after the grace period expires. Given the potential impact on your employment status, you might want to consider whether refinancing options are available before your financial situation becomes more complicated. I left Marcus and Patricia in the conference room and walked directly to James Morrison's office, carrying documentation that would transform my professional standing while ending Marcus's supervisory authority. The conversation with James was brief and decisive, focusing on liability issues and client relationship management rather than personal grievances or workplace drama. Within an hour, Marcus had been suspended pending a full investigation of discriminatory workplace practices, and I'd been appointed interim supervisor for all accounts he'd previously managed. The transition was handled with the efficiency of a firm that understood both legal liability and client service priorities. But the real satisfaction came Monday morning, when I received confirmation that Marcus's mortgage payment had been submitted on time despite his professional circumstances. He understood that defaulting on debt obligations I controlled would accelerate consequences beyond his employment situation, affecting his personal financial stability and residential security. The irony was complete. Marcus had spent months trying to teach me about professional hierarchy and appropriate subordination. Instead, he'd provided me with opportunities to demonstrate strategic thinking, client relationship management, and long-term planning capabilities that exceeded anything he could teach or evaluate. Tuesday brought a call from Patricia Harrison with news that would cement my professional transformation. Harrison Development was expanding their investment portfolio and wanted to engage Meridian for comprehensive real estate analysis across the Pacific Northwest. The contract represented millions in managed assets and required exactly the kind of specialized expertise I'd been developing through personal investments and professional analysis. "We want you to lead the entire engagement," Patricia explained. "Your strategic thinking and analytical capabilities are exactly what we need for this expansion. Can you handle project management for something this comprehensive?" I accepted the engagement with confidence I'd earned through months of proving myself under conditions designed to break my spirit. The project would establish my reputation as a senior analyst capable of managing major client relationships independently, while providing income that would exceed Marcus's annual salary. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my professional transformation was the opportunity to mentor other women facing similar workplace challenges. Within weeks of Marcus's suspension, 3 female colleagues approached me privately to discuss discriminatory treatment they'd been experiencing from other supervisors. My documentation methods and strategic approach became a template for addressing workplace harassment while building professional leverage. 6 months later, I was promoted to Vice President of Real Estate Investment Analysis, managing a team of senior analysts and overseeing client relationships that represented significant portions of Meridian's revenue. Marcus had been terminated during the investigation that revealed systematic discriminatory behavior affecting multiple female employees, and his employment termination had indeed affected his ability to maintain mortgage payments. The foreclosure process was handled professionally through my property management company, with Marcus's home sold at market value to cover outstanding debt obligations. He found employment at a smaller firm, where his supervisory responsibilities were limited, and his compensation was substantially reduced. The house he'd lost became a rental property in my expanding portfolio, generating monthly income that exceeded what his mortgage payments had provided. The full circle was complete. Marcus's attempts to diminish my professional standing had instead provided me with opportunities to develop capabilities he couldn't match, build client relationships he couldn't control, and acquire financial leverage he couldn't overcome. His failure to recognize my actual competence had blinded him to the strategic advantages I was building, while he focused on petty humiliations and administrative control. But the most important lesson wasn't about revenge or professional competition. It was about the power of patient strategic thinking, comprehensive documentation, and refusing to accept that other people's limitations should define your own possibilities. Marcus had tried to teach me that professional success required accepting subordination and grateful compliance with inappropriate treatment. Instead, I'd learned that professional success required strategic thinking, comprehensive preparation, and the confidence to deploy leverage when circumstances demanded decisive action. The toilet brush he'd handed me with such satisfaction had become a symbol of his misjudgment and my willingness to excel, regardless of the circumstances I was given. A year later, I received a letter from Marcus requesting loan modification terms for a different property he'd purchased after losing his home. The letter was professionally written and appropriately deferential, acknowledging that his previous employment situation had affected his creditworthiness and requesting consideration based on improved financial stability. I approved the loan modification with terms that were fair but reflected appropriate risk assessment based on his employment history and demonstrated financial judgment. The decision was based entirely on analytical criteria rather than personal considerations, demonstrating the professional objectivity he'd never been able to maintain when our positions were reversed. The interaction served as a final reminder that professional competence and personal character operate independently of hierarchy and authority. Marcus had possessed senior position and supervisory power, but he'd lacked the strategic thinking and ethical judgment necessary to use those advantages constructively. I'd started with subordinate status and limited authority, but I'd possessed analytical capabilities and strategic patience that ultimately proved more valuable than artificial positional advantages. The story became legend within Meridian's corporate culture, though the details were often simplified or distorted through retelling. New employees learned about the importance of professional ethics and merit-based advancement, while managers understood that discriminatory behavior carried consequences that extended beyond disciplinary action. But for me, the experience represented something more fundamental than career advancement or professional vindication. It demonstrated that strategic thinking, comprehensive preparation, and patient execution could overcome systematic disadvantages and transform apparent weakness into decisive strength. The corner office I'd been assigned during my Original promotion remained mine, but it had been expanded and redesigned to reflect my enhanced responsibilities and client relationship requirements. The space now included a conference area for client meetings, a research center for real estate analysis, and a desk that faced windows overlooking Seattle's downtown core. From those windows, I could see several properties in my investment portfolio, including the building where Marcus had once lived before his professional misjudgments affected his ability to maintain mortgage obligations. The view served as a daily reminder that patient strategic thinking and comprehensive preparation could transform any situation, regardless of how hopeless it might initially appear. The real estate investment business I'd built while navigating Marcus's harassment had grown into a substantial portfolio generating passive income that exceeded my Meridian salary. The financial independence provided security and confidence that enhanced my professional performance while ensuring that my career advancement was based on competence rather than economic necessity. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of my transformation was the opportunity to share strategies and insights with other professionals facing similar challenges. The documentation methods, strategic planning approaches, and leverage building techniques I developed became resources for women throughout the financial industry who were dealing with discriminatory treatment or professional sabotage. The toilet brush Marcus had handed me with such contempt had become a symbol of transformation and strategic patience. Not because cleaning restrooms was inherently degrading, but because accepting inappropriate treatment while building strategic advantages demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything he could teach or understand. Years later, when junior analysts asked for career advice, I would often share the story of how comprehensive responsibility assignments had taught me patience, strategic thinking, and the importance of maintaining professional excellence regardless of circumstances. The lesson wasn't about accepting inappropriate treatment, but about recognizing opportunities to demonstrate competence while gathering information that could be deployed when decisive action became necessary. The mortgage payments that continued to arrive monthly from various properties in my portfolio included reminders of how strategic thinking and patient execution could transform apparent disadvantages into lasting advantages. Marcus's attempt to teach me about professional hierarchy had instead taught me about financial leverage, strategic planning, and the power of information properly deployed. The story ended not with dramatic confrontation or personal vindication, but with professional transformation based on competence, strategic thinking, and the patient application of analytical capabilities that transcended artificial hierarchical limitations. The real victory wasn't defeating Marcus, but becoming someone whose professional success was based on actual capabilities rather than positional advantages or other people's misjudgments. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.